Hello, everyone, and welcome to Community Bookstore's virtual event series. Thank you especially for joining us amid the progression of some truly unprecedented events in DC. My name is Camille Meir, and I'm on the events team at the bookstore, and I'm thrilled to be welcoming Felicia Rose Chavez and Susan Briante to present their very timely new releases, respectively, the Anti-Racist Writing Workshop and Defacing the Monument. While the pandemic has taken a toll across all of our lives, virtual programs like the one you're about to see have become bright spots and refuges in our days. So I want to give a huge thanks to Felicia and Susan for joining us this evening amid everything that's going on. So just a quick note for housekeeping. You should be able to see and hear our presenters, but they cannot hear or see you. So if you have a question, please click on the Q&A button at the very bottom of the screen to submit your question. We'll try to get through as many questions as we can at the end of the program. There's also a chat button down here where I will be posting links to purchase tonight's books, so please keep an eye out for that and please click and buy. One caveat for tonight's event, we're all at the mercy of our home internet connections and server loads, so please bear with any technical issues that might arise. We will try to solve them as quickly as possible. We'll be continuing our virtual event series across the whole spring, so please head over to our website and sign up for our newsletter to stay up to date. One that I want to point out is that next Thursday, we're pleased to welcome Catherine Davis, Merve Emre, Chloe Aridhis, and Danielle Dutton to discuss The Hearing Trumpet by Leonora Carrington, which is part of the New York Review of Books Classics series of events. Registrations for that event are live now, so please check it out on our website. So now just a little bit about our authors, and then we'll get started. Felicia Rose Chavez is an award-winning educator with an MFA in creative nonfiction from the University of Iowa. She is the author of the Anti-Racist Writing Workshop, How to Decolonize the Creative Classroom, and co-editor of the Breakbeat Poets, Volume 4, Latinx, with Willie Perdomo and Jose Olivares. Originally from Albuquerque, New Mexico, she currently serves as the Creativity and Innovation Scholar in Residence at Colorado College in Colorado Springs. Susan Briante's book, The Market Wonders, was a finalist for the National Poetry Series. The Kenyon Review calls it masterful at every turn. She was also the author of the poetry collections Defacing the Monument, Pioneers in the Study of Motion, and Utopia Minus, both of those from Asada Press. Briante is a professor of creative writing and literature at the University of Arizona. Felicia, Susan, thank you so much. The virtual stage is now yours.
Thank you.
Thank you. It's so nice to be here with you, Felicia. It's really nice to have those of you who are here be present on a day when it's really difficult, I think, for any of us to be present. So I just want to welcome you and to welcome your attention and or distraction while you're here. I have found these virtual events very comforting during the sort of extended crisis of the past year. And maybe one of the things that makes them comforting is that you can, just lie down on your couch and listen. So I hope I'm sharing the sentiment that people this isn't class and you can just relax and tune in and tune out to us as you can.
Sure. And it's so relevant. I mean, I've shared with Susan that I have some illness in my house right now, and I was kind of coaxing my son to sleep finally after hours and laid down and closed my eyes, and what felt like 20 minutes later turned on my cell phone to catastrophe. I mean, just to, one would call catastrophe or culmination of, history in motion. And there was a quote, Susan, from your book that I was holding on to as I was kind of doom scrolling, right, down social media. We need a kind of negative capability to deal with the present moment, to see the present as another coordinate in a long history of racist, misogynist, and capitalist oppression. And I thought, yeah, we can't just take this moment and say, oh, well, it's because of this one personality, or it's because of, this particular situation. It's long been in motion. And it's sad and scary and I've just got such a heaviness right now. And so, you know, I hope for some, the fact that these books exist is like a bit of a beacon, because I have to hold on to it as a sense of hope, to just exercise the voice to speak out, and want something better.
Absolutely. I was just thinking, you know, the events today, which aren't a culmination, which are a continuation of stuff that was so predictable in some ways, is testament to why we need to continue to listen to the voices, to all the voices in the US. We need to listen to the voices of writers of color, which is one of the things that is so beautifully illustrated in your book, how important it is to make sure we are meeting our students as who they are, where they are, and valuing their experience. I think a lot of people look at what the events that unfolded today or are continuing to unfold in Washington and think the unthinkable is happening. And I think a lot of people aren't surprised at all.
Exactly. Yeah.
And that difference in experience is exactly why there's something so important, powerful, and political that happens in the workshop, and something that I think you honor and give space for in your book. And I'm so grateful that it exists.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, we were just talking about how our paths crossed, and how we each had, you know, each other's galleys in our hands, and how powerful that moment felt, because it was like a connection for me that I was saying I wouldn't have naturally made, where I just kind of browsing the bookstore, and when I opened those first pages, I thought, yes, like this is the echo, like in so many, like in a different context, you know, but it felt like an echo of all of the goals and values that I myself was working through these past couple of years. And so it was just really exciting for me, because it is an isolated experience writing a book. And I feel like, yes, I have an ally, like I have a friend in this process, and just to be able to be in conversation with you right now is an honor. So thank you.
Thank you. I told Felicia just before I had a book crush on her and her book. And even today, trying to prep for our conversation, I was trying to figure out how to use like 3 different highlighters, like highlighting the parts that I wanted to talk about, and highlighting the parts that I wanted to photocopy and send around to my department. And then the parts I wanted to remember for teaching. And, it's a really useful book. And I don't know if this will resonate for you, Felicia, but I think many of us who come from families that maybe like getting an MFA or even doing graduate work isn't like accepted or very common, or you come from a kind of working class background, there's this sense of like, what are you going to do with this degree in poetry, or what are you going to do with this creative writing? And I look at your book and I think like this does so much. It is offering students a chance to take and see their own. It's not offering students. I mean, your process offers students, but it's offering educators a chance to learn how to offer students the space to have their own voices, experiences, ways of thinking and processing the world be validated. And that is like transformative work.
Yeah, it's entering into a room with students and seeing your artistic ally. It's seeing each individual with a writing legacy, and honoring those writing legacies by entering into a dialogue with each person, and kind of sharing in that knowledge construction, so that by the end of term, each person has set their stake, and made writing meaningful and relevant to them, as opposed to filling them with the knowledge and resources that we think are the most appropriate for their future success. So I want to engage, and I want to change it. Like I really do, deep down. I want to change it. And, you know, I do these facilitations and I'm like, if one of us goes and changes our syllabus, if one of us enters into the classroom with a different perspective and enters into our own heart with a deeper reflective impetus, you know, so that we're able to assess, you know, our own, you know, writing legacy, our own teaching inheritance, what we've learned along the way, and how we can pivot to adopt this new moment in honor of our students and what they have to offer. I want it so badly. And I'm so excited to start these conversations and to make change.
And so many people do, and so many students do, and it really is invaluable work. I seriously was like calculating, so how many of these books can I buy so I can give them out to folks? It is really wonderful. It's really wonderful and necessary work, and it will enhance the workshop experience for everyone there, because you know, you just put the emphasis in all the right places. So I'm excited for our audience to be able to maybe hear you read a little bit from that work if you want to.
Absolutely. Yeah. I'll couch it with a quote of your own, which, you know, this section is from the introduction of the book. And I have it, like I actually physically have it in my hand finally, which is so exciting. So you quote Brandon Shimoda, actually. Am I pronouncing that correctly?
Yeah.
Yeah. It is easy in a space designed to bleed people of their stories for the imagination to go dark and stay dark. And that quote resonated with me because I think of how many writers of color reach out to me and say that they've dropped out of their writing programs, be it undergraduate students who no longer want to be an English major, or graduate students who forgo the MFA, or who opt for a low residency program to just distance themselves from the toxic racism within their own programs. How many writers are silenced within programs that encourage us to exercise voice? It's the irony that this particular introduction points out. So I'll share around 10-minute excerpt of that work. It's called Decolonizing the Creative Classroom. In graduate school at the University of Iowa's nonfiction writing workshop, I was what you might call a difficult student. I own that. Black hoodie, black boots, black coat, slumped and down at the classroom desk, alert and vocal and pissed off. Alienated and isolated and deeply lonely and cold. I remember icicles daggering the air, a cold so bad my toilet water froze. How quaint, many said about Iowa City. Liberal, walkable, cheap, a real writer's paradise. But I got long stares at the co-op grocery that said, "You don't belong here." I was a brown-skinned Chicana, conspicuous in my white picket rental. And when I'd complain about the Iowans who asked me to see them to a fitting room, to refill their water, to point them to a restroom, "I don't work here," I'd repeat through gritted teeth. My family would tell me to hold my tongue and focus on the writing. I was, after all, lucky to be in the workshop. Thus, the implicit imperative for people of color in MFA programs to write, but not to exercise voice. Because if we spoke up, the great and terrible Oz would reveal itself as a sickly white monolith, leeching on tradition in an effort to sustain its self-important power. Still, we were the chosen few lucky to be there. We were not about to mess it up by complaining, except maybe to one another behind locked doors. Silencing writers is central to the traditional writing workshop model, hearkening back to 1936 when the University of Iowa instituted the first degree-granting creative writing program in the country. The traditional model maintains that participants read a classmate's manuscript independently in advance of workshop. Participants proceed to mark up the manuscript, then type a critical response to the writer in letter format. When participants reconvene in workshop, they air their opinions amongst themselves for as long as an hour while the writer takes notes. Per the pedagogical rite of passage, the writer is forbidden to speak. This silencing, particularly of writers of color, is especially destructive in institutions that routinely disregard the lived experience of people of color. This matrix of silence is so profound, it enlists writers of color to eradicate ourselves. Even now, as I type this, my heart tells me, no, you can't say that. You might derail your teaching career, shrink your literary network, hurt their feelings, sound ungrateful, blow things out of proportion. Even though I am the commander of my own experience, my heart tells me to choose subservience out of fear that my narrative might ricochet off of institutionalized white power and smack me upside the head. That's how racism works, right? It's systematic oppression that breeds behavioral norms. Because when the flowering trees bloomed pink, Iowa City was charming. I'd buy egg rolls and coffee at the farmer's market and then spend hours perusing secondhand stores, my fingertips a dusty black, snatching anything colorful to make my house a home. I had friends, a select few brilliant women who dragged me on walks when I rather brood, who fed me vegetables when I'd rather binge, who discussed global politics when I lacked perspective. I had earnest students who were unafraid of risk and a champion thesis advisor who reserved me a seat at her family's dinner table. But this book is not about individuals. It's not even about Iowa. Before the University of Iowa, I went to the University of New Mexico, and before that, DePaul University and Wellesley College, each of which replicated an identical workshop model. Note, this book is about institutions, more specifically, institutional racism, the system of advantage based on race. When I speak of the traditional writing workshop model, I speak of an institution of dominance and control upheld by supposedly venerable workshop leaders, primarily white, majority white workshop participants, and canonical white authors memorialized in hefty anthologies, the required texts of study. And when I speak of dominance and control, I'm really talking about silence. I'm not just referring to the traditional workshop ritual of silencing the author when critiquing their work. Building tough skin, they call it, to better prepare for the real world, as though writers of color live anywhere else, as though our skin is not leathered to the touch, but a profound, ubiquitous silence, the nearly complete omission of writers of color in person and in print. It is as though we do not exist. Junot Diaz puts it well, I was a person of color in a workshop whose theory of reality did not include my most fundamental experiences as a person of color. That did not, in other words, include me. Here I quote the concrete and systematic issues addressed in Diaz's groundbreaking New Yorker article while acknowledging his toxic legacy of abuse against women. No doubt, Sandra Cisneros puts it better. I hated it. Diaz is a Pulitzer Prize-winning novelist, Cisneros a MacArthur Fellow. The resentment felt by writers of color is not due to lack of talent, that we can't hang with the big boys, but rather due to the endemic oppression within literary arts programs. This was true when I was a financially independent, first-generation undergraduate student. This was true when I was a graduate fellowship student, and it's true now that I'm a visiting assistant professor of English at a private liberal arts college. It's like writing programs are stuck in 1936, encased in shatterproof glass, museum relics safeguarding whiteness as the essence of literary integrity. In 2018, I was one of the only people of color in my English department, and that made me feel physically, emotionally, and intellectually at risk for harm. Compound race, gender, and stature. I thought you were a student, colleagues would often comment. With my working class background and presto, instant and incessant anxiety catapulting me back in time to when I was a graduate student. Anxiety when the editor of the literary journal asks me to step down as a volunteer reader because I express concern that her all-white staff might result in aesthetic bias. Anxiety when a white female professor uses a black pen to cross out references to ethnicity in my personal essay, noting in the margins, you don't need to make it a race thing. Anxiety when a white male professor, former teacher of the year, keeps me after class to discuss my repeated requests for a more inclusive reading list. He sits inappropriately close, sarcastically mocking how unfair it is, how unfair that I'm not represented in the syllabus. He yells so loud that a concerned colleague knocks on the door. Anxiety when a white male professor, whom I intend to claim as mentor, begins class with a vote. One of the faculty members, I'll later learn that it's the administrative assistant rather than one of the 7 white nonfiction professors, insists that we hire a person of color for the Visiting Writers series. Would you prefer that we bring in a person of color or a quality writer, someone who's doing really exciting things? He suggests that we go around the room one by one and voice our vote aloud. I'm the only person of color present, planted at the tail end of the circle, and so I witnessed 12 or so of my white peers, esteemed journalists and rhetoric instructors alike, play into the false binary. No people of color. We want quality writers only. My whole body shakes like I'm cold, but I'm not cold. I'm hot. My face must be so red, I remember thinking. Can't they see my face? But of course they don't see me. That's the point. When it's my turn to vote, I stand up, shaking, hot, my legs disobedient anchors, and exit the room. I don't say a word. I save it for when the garage door shuts behind me at home. Why didn't you say anything? I sometimes ask myself. It was on me to speak for a whole people, and in that moment I choked. To speak up was to enact my powerlessness, isolating me from my classmates who would go on to befriend one another, marry one another, hire one another later in their careers. To speak up was to square off with my professor, the white person in power, the very man who had attracted me to Iowa, whose favor I courted. The implications, the outcomes of moments like these can last a lifetime. Days later, this professor will invite me out for coffee. I'll recount my discomfort in defense of my early exit. I hardly think I said it like that, he'll reply, rolling his eyes. And an instant trifecta of thoughts will dash the line. 1, that I'm just another overexcited brown person, embarrassing myself with wild stories because, come on, it wasn't that bad. Can't you just let it go? 2, that it always comes down to words for us writers. There's power there, and we know it. And 3, that he's just another calculating white person attempting to manipulate my narrative to better reflect on him. One after another, my professors will reach out in an attempt to manage the situation being me, of course, and not insatiable white supremacy. I'll endure each awkward exchange, cryptic, self-serving emails and hallway chats, and then tick that professor off of my list of potential mentors. In class, my peers are starry-eyed, but all have X-ray glasses that expose my professor's bias. Whenever we interact, I'll feel anxious and resentful and vulnerable and regretful too, that I can't just be cool. I didn't know it then, but I would eventually tick, tick, tick out of options and have to venture outside of the English department to studio art and education in order to secure mentorship. Oh, to drop out of school, that everlasting gobstopper of a fantasy I lodged in my mouth day and night for 3 years of graduate study. But loyal to my family's wishes, I held my tongue. Or at least the Chicana version of holding my tongue, which was to make a big fuss trying to change the workshop from within. All I had to do was expose the privileged white male identity Iowa assumed as universal, right? Together with a trusted friend from my cohort, I formed a student diversity committee. I served as the elected student liaison to faculty. I petitioned for the emergency hire of a professor of color, and I co-founded Toward a New Canon, an elective class that featured contemporary writers of color. I channeled my anger into action, and still a white peer called me militant. Another white peer called me radical. Another white peer suggested over coffee that I, quote, toe the line until graduation because everyone's already stressed out enough. Here I thought I was a step closer to belonging, if not at the co-op grocery, then at least within my own cohort. But no, The backlash was just as hostile as the censorship. Even white allies warned me to tone it down, fearful that my activism was annihilating my professional network. I was losing the game of graduate school. Move on, they said, but I couldn't. I wouldn't. Move where? I wanted to ask. I live in this skin. I comforted myself with a make-believe fellowship girl, how years from now she could exist on the page, maybe write about her home, her culture, her birthplace, her body, without suffering the white-splaining workshop critique. Or maybe she could live in her imagination, without pressure to personify her ethnicity. This and more, but only if I succeeded in effecting change. Around year 2, I noticed that my classmates' heads were full of manuscripts, but I was gummed up in diversity's gear work. My double consciousness had triggered a double burden between diversity committee meetings, faculty meetings, class meetings, and the inevitable bouts of pissed off crying. When was I supposed to write? My professors expected me to accommodate their ignorance, explaining racism as though it were an objective subject separate from themselves. Their impatience and defensiveness got to be too much. I'm not supposed to be educating you, I wanted to scream. I'm supposed to focus on the writing. Over time, even writing proved problematic, for what was I supposed to write about? Certainly not me. To willingly exacerbate the paternalism of my professors and peers by writing memoir, that was just foolish. The genre was, by default, white. My cultural, intellectual, historical, and political consciousness baffled others at best. At worst, my writing made them feel left out or guilty or indignant. I had to be real with myself. All this work and nothing had changed. Nothing was ever going to change because the powers that be didn't want change. Eating pizza in bed started to look a whole lot better than affecting change. I bought a Snuggie. My critical essays were a logical muddle. My workshop feedback to peers was limp praise handwritten in the half hour before deadline. Most of all, I dreaded my own workshops, bowing silently while my professor and peers, the ones who wanted quality writers only, the ones who wanted me to toe the line, schooled me in how to write like them. Use our words, they seemed to say, and with time and hard work, you too can have voice. I hated it, but I did it, because I was more than just a writer. I was a teacher. I knew that a better workshop model existed because I had conducted one in my own high school creative writing classrooms back in Chicago. My anti-racist approach decentered whiteness and redistributed power equitably among participants and instructors. While I didn't have a graduate cohort to which I belonged and felt safe, at least I could create it for my undergraduate students in Iowa. The anti-racist workshop is a study in love. It advances humility and empathy over control and domination, freeing educators to deconstruct bias to achieve a cultural shift in perspective, to design democratic learning spaces for creative concentration, to recruit, nourish, and fortify students of color to best empower them to exercise voice, and to embolden every student to self-advocate as a responsible citizen in a globalized community. At Iowa, I earned an MFA in writing, but it was actually the art of creating healthy, sustainable, and empowering communities in my undergraduate classrooms that I learned over those years. At first, I was nervous to institute the alternative anti-racist workshop model I tested in Chicago because my Iowa students were all white. Would they care, I wondered? It turns out they did care, so much so that they nominated me for a teaching award. I won the award, but more so, I won the confidence to formalize my workshop into a replicable model, one that I've honed in large and small groups across the country. The Anti-Racist Writing Workshop is the culmination of 13 years of progressive educational practice, a synthesis of my most successful teaching strategies. Thank you.
Thank you. It's so wonderful. And the book so masterfully interweaves personal experience. These vignettes of your own experience with really practical examples, lesson plans, exercises. Like, as I said, I was reading it with 6 different hats on, like for as a teacher myself, as how I wanted to use it to talk to other friends, for places where it was pleasurable and I was recognizing experiences that I had had friends testify to or I had seen happen in workshop. It's just, it's a beautiful work. One of the things that stuck with me is even how you draw attention to even the language we use in our syllabi, like that word master, and what happens the minute we think about all the full connotations of that word, its ugly legacies, and then think about another possibility instead of mastery for our students. And one of the things that I think you also do is I'm trying sort of thinking and talking on the fly in the state I'm in today, but you know, I feel like sometimes mastery is, or mastery is associated with control, and in control there's not vulnerability. And I think one of the other real gifts of this work is the ways in which you make yourself vulnerable on the page. Like I have open to a section right now where you talk about having your students write a list of the things that they're afraid of, and you include a list of the things that you were afraid of in terms of writing this book.
Yeah. I mean, I thank you to everything you're saying. It's such beautiful feedback for me to receive. I think that the great fear of writing this book, one is that it's hard to say, I think I'm on to something, right? I think something is happening in this room again and again, and it's special. And I want to take note of that, right? And so I felt like I needed to pair it with my personal experience, because for me, there is no separation between teaching and art making. Like they are one and the same, and they play off of one another. And so the story naturally lent itself to the classroom policy or practice, in all its failures and successes. I mean, you know, the book does not shy away from saying like, this really didn't work. Like, so I tried something else. And that's the ethos of it, right? Is that let's try a different way. But also this great fear of writing it that I think is the exercise of white supremacy itself, right? Which is like, I can't tell this story. I'm afraid to tell this story, and all the fear that goes with it. When writers of color exercise voice, there's so much fear. There's so much emotional, intellectual, psychological, what you name again and again in your book as violence, you know, and I appreciate your use of that word, because it is something that becomes embodied and normalized for so many of us, too many of us. And what I appreciated in your own text is this constant refrain of implication. And so here I am so afraid of, oh, what are people going to say who I went to school with, you know, or people who taught me. And what happened, and you know, there's room for more to happen, but what happened early on in terms of the early release of the book is that folks who were colleagues in graduate school came back to me and implicated themselves. I was in that room. I can retell that story from the opposite side of the room looking at you, and here's what happened. And I don't stop thinking about that moment. And it shocked me that this exercise of implication, right, that you talk about so beautifully, any of us who write from positions of privilege need to cultivate our ability to recognize the violence that our positions enact, even unwittingly. We need to learn the violence carried and encoded upon our bodies, and instead of waiting to become confronted, we need to learn to seek that self-reflective and self-destructive trembling. That meant so much to me, because it is an act, it is active anti-racism, right? It's not, oh, I'm going to study this book and teach myself some things, but I'm going to take action and take the initiative to implicate myself in this long legacy of suffering and violence. So, you know, I applaud applaud the use of that word, and applaud the fact that it's couched into your practice and your teaching practice.
Thank you. And to contextualize my book, and then maybe I'll read just a little snippet. So this book, Defacing the Monument, came out of teaching as well. And the particulars of the teaching that I was doing involved a program that we run here at the University in Arizona, where we bring grad students to work and engage in reciprocal research and writing projects in a small town called Patagonia, about 20 minutes from the US-Mexico border. We're about 45 minutes up here in Tucson. And they're encouraged to write about social justice or environmental issues. And as part of that, we've worked with community partners, such as the Kino Border Initiative. And it's a migrant aid and advocacy organization that's binational. And in fact, I'm donating half of the royalties from my book to KBI because the work they do is so fantastic. In that process, as a faculty member and with my students going down to begin to document and try to get my brain around what was going on at the border, this crisis that's been in large part created by our government, I came up against what does it mean to be trying to tell stories of social justice from a position that's not mine, but in which I am implicated as an American citizen, as a white person in America. What is being done in the US border and in other countries in my name. And so that's sort of the spirit out of which this book came out. And it's exciting to me to think about this work in the context of the kind of work and writing you're doing, because I do hope, one of my biggest hopes is that with this book is that it's useful to folks, and it's hopefully useful to teachers, and it's useful to writers, and helping us to think about how we approach the writing projects that we want to do. I'm going to just take a second to share my screen and just share a little bit from the book. I'll start with a section about Operation Streamline, which is a judicial proceeding that happens here in Tucson and other cities along the US-Mexico border, where migrants are formally charged for the criminal violation of entering the US illegally. And then I'll end with a section that takes place in a migrant women's shelter in Nogales, Mexico. It's the shelter that's run by the Kino Border Initiative. And you should be able to see my screen now if you want to. Can you see that? Okay, great. And that's the Kino Border Initiative, in case you just want to go donate to them anyway, because they're amazing. And in this first part, in this proceeding, the Operation Streamline proceeding, you'll also see how this silencing of the voices and experience of people is state sanctioned, how state sanctioned violence against migrants and white supremacy also works. The word economic does not appear in the text of the Department of Homeland Security's webpage entitled Obtaining Asylum in the United States. It's not uttered into the court record. The word economic remains in my mouth at the back of the courtroom, where I sit scribbling on a legal pad, trying to trace a relation to the 7 men who stand before the judge, shackled at the wrists, waists, and ankles. The body is a condition, the nation another. I used to believe the document tethered the poem to the earth, to soil that one could taste, that could be nutrient to more than one. But a document can pull a nation out from under you. In the US District Court, Arizona District, shackles chime like the riggings of a ship in harbor. In the moments before a voyage, 7 men approach the bench. One by one, they speak directly into the microphone to become a name in a document, a few words in the record, and 1 syllable of consent. Do you understand the rights that you are giving up, the consequences of pleading guilty, and the terms of your written plea agreement? Are you pleading guilty voluntarily and of your own free will? Are you a citizen of the United States? On or about March 17th, 2017, did you enter the United States from Mexico near Nogales without coming through a designated port of entry? How do you plead to the charge of illegal entry? Do you understand the rights that you are giving up, the consequences of pleading guilty and the terms of your written plea agreement? Are you pleading guilty voluntarily and of your own free will? Are you a citizen of the United States? On or about March 18th, 2017, did you enter the United States from Mexico near Lukeville without coming through a designated port of entry? How do you plead to the charge of illegal entry? Do you understand the rights that you are giving up, the consequences of pleading guilty and the terms of your written plea agreement? Are you pleading guilty voluntarily and of your own free will? Are you a citizen of the United States? On or about March 14th, 2017, did you enter the United States from Mexico near Sasabe without coming through a designated port of entry? How do you plead to the charge of illegal entry? If a line is a dot that went for a walk, then a wall is a line that divides Nogales, Arizona from Nogales, Sonora. A deportee is a man who left his kids at a bus stop, was pulled over by the cops, could not produce a social security number, and was sent first to jail, then to Nogales, Sonora, to be handed his belongings in a large Ziploc bag from the Department of Homeland Security. A frame of words can determine what we see. A man walks across the US-Mexico border along a partitioned walkway. A man walks across the US-Mexico border in a caged walkway. US officials escort a man across the US-Mexico border in a human cage. And if I refer to him as a father of two, and if I refer to him as a man, and if I refer to him as a refugee, and if I refer to him as a migrant, and if I refer to him as undocumented, and if I refer to him as a defendant, and if I refer to him as illegal, and if I refer to him as a criminal, metaphors make circles of our lives, a Venn diagram of contrast and resemblance. Who goes where? In the 5th floor apartment that serves as a migrant woman and children's shelter in Nogales, Sonora, an 18-year-old girl who wants to see her father, a woman from Central America who left under death threat, a mother who fled an abusive relationship and now needs to make more money to support her children and grandchildren, and an 80-year-old who wants to cross into Nogales, Arizona for the 8th time so she can sell paletas from a pushcart. A nun prods them into telling their stories to us, 4 women and 1 man visiting from a creative writing program at a state university just an hour to the north of them. The eldest woman stands, raising her hand as if testifying or praying. She says when the first President Bush came into office, he tried to make life hard for migrants, but we rose up, she explains, and stopped him. She says as soon as she can, she will go back to the popsicle factory, to her boss. She tells us her boss's name and address, says her boss will give her a card to help her stay as soon as she can get back. And the woman who fled her country under death threat says, we want peace. Decades of US policies and interventions in Central America that favor business interests over the majority of the population, that export gang members and failed anti-gang policies much seem like a long, dirty war. Do you feel better when you tell us these stories? One of us asks. When the woman does not answer, just keeps telling her story. We are teaching them to make earrings, the nun explains as she brings us into another room and shows us beaded jewelry. Row upon row, each piece a little memorial to every woman who has come through the shelter. What did the nun tell them about our presence or what we might be able to do for them? Were they told we could help? Were they told we could help before the end of their 2-week stay at the women's shelter, after which they would have to find their way north or back from where they came? Were they told some faulty equation of voice and change, some scrawl of hope, like the flight of sparrows stalling and diving without knowing whose house they alight upon? And what did we think we could do? Every summer for the past 3, I've gone to Nogales, Mexico with students from the University of Arizona's MFA in creative writing. And each summer, as we bear witness to conditions migrants face, we wonder, how can we amplify voices without turning other people's stories into commodity? without reaffirming the faulty myth of giving voice. We do not want to reduce the struggles of the migrants we meet to mere human interest stories. We know that writing will not be enough. The change necessary to improve the migrant women's lives feels utterly unavailable and beyond any single transaction. We will work hard, the women tell us. Do you have bracelets? We eventually ask. Thank you.
Thank you. I love hearing you read. I love hearing the poet's rendition of the essay. It's so beautiful.
Thank you.
Can you just, I'm dying to know this from the moment I opened your book and this beautiful postcard fell out, and the striking visuals. Can you just speak to that? Because you added it into this presentation, and I'm just curious about your intentionality about like the visuals, obviously the document, and your interaction with it.
I have to give large credit to the amazing poet and performer and designer Douglas Kearney, who does the design for Noeme books. And I mean, I knew that from the beginning. I had, you know, my little Word document, I was throwing in these visual elements because it was important for me, if I was thinking about archives, to maybe make it evident that this is the creation of an archive as well, of sorts, and that it's not natural, right? Like, you know, you're seeing what I decided to put in, and I feel like, again, by like laying that bare, that we allow people to then approach it not as normalized or natural, but to question it, right? And to think, oh,
Yeah.
you know, what else could have been here? What is she leaving out? So that intention was there. And then Doug Kearney did this really amazing job, I think, of capturing that idea of trying to make the archive, the materiality of the archive, sort of manifest in what was happening in the book.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, absolutely. My husband was laughing at me the other night because I was reading it in bed, and I actually had the book, like I was turning it as I was reading this like newspaper article that was included on the side. And he was like, huh, you're like really interacting with that book. And I think it invites that, like you give yourself completely over to it, because there's worksheets. I mean, there's like questions. It's an interactive experience. And I think that's really cool in pairing with your preference for, you know, this, you talk about stories erased and recording the knowledge we receive from unarchived experiences. You talk about folk tales, gossip, rumor, dream. I love this. The talk that talks like trees underground, sharing sugar and water and energy. The talk we talk in poetry. And it reflects that, right? Because it's many things. It's expansive. And it's really beautiful. So just to say, you get a book, but you get this piece of art as well. And it's really lovely.
Well, thank you. And again, like part of that idea of allowing people to sort of write in the book and answer questions, I think is reflective of something that I think you're embodying in your pedagogical model as well. I mean, in like what I pointed out before, is that not only are you offering ways to think about structuring the creative writing workshop, but you're enacting them for us in your own book. And it's a way of pushing against that idea of mastery, either by the author or by the facilitator or the instructor or the professor, so that it's not about owning, colonizing, feeling that we're controlling some kind of knowledge, and that we even know, I mean, who are we as instructors to know the knowledge that's in our students, right? Or in our readers, and to allow a kind of space for that dialogue, which is so beautiful. And again, I thank you in your book for making that evident and part of the pedagogy and part of the way that your book is designed as well.
We're ready to take it on, Susan. Let's just do it. Let's do it. It's time. Yes. I say that everywhere I go. It's long been time. We're ready.
Yes.
Yeah.
Should we take on some questions from
I
the
think we should.
Q&A?
Yeah, it's getting rowdy downstairs. I apologize to everybody if you hear my children screaming.
Thank you for lending us yourself for a little while.
I'll read out the Q&A questions, and Felicia and Susan, you can answer. So I'll just start with the bottom one. An attendee said that they're really compelled by the question that was in Susan's book, I think: how do we amplify people's voices without commodifying their stories? And can you both just speak more to that? I think that's a really interesting predicament as well.
Susan, why don't you start with that one? I feel like that's incredibly relevant to your book.
Sure. I think, I think in the first place is we can ask ourselves, do we need to tell their stories, or can we empower them or create space so that people can tell their own stories? And if we come back with the question, okay, so somehow I need to represent that story, then I think it's really important to represent a story within as broad of a context as we can, so that it's not, and again, like I'm going to keep doing this, but there's so many connections. I loved from the excerpt that Felicia read when she mentions this isn't about one person or one instructor. It's about institutions and a structural racism, right? And that's, I think there's I was trained as a journalist, so there's this desire we often have to humanize, right, these big issues. And I think that's natural and it's important, but if we make one person's story this kind of, without considering this kind of object that people can look at and feel pity for, and feel sort of sadness and turn the page, as opposed to understanding the system that creates that, and then how we as writers and as readers are implicated in that system, then we take steps away from making that story just a commodity, take steps towards not making the story a commodity.
Yeah, I mean, I think in my own classroom, I'm encouraging those voices that are not often celebrated within their own cultures, within their own household. It's that you don't put your business out on the street, first of all. Like you don't, there's this cultural imperative not to share stories outside of the home. I take it so far as to have students come into the classroom and we collectively design the syllabus. So there's a class that I teach called the Inspiration Lab, in which students bring in something that they seek out, their artistic mentor. And that can be anything from a comic book to an audio play, to a hip hop album, to a sculpture, to Dickens, right? But they bring in the thing that they go to when they need it. And we share in that. We have a reading list that we all experience collectively, and we seek our own inspiration out of our peers, mentors. I also encourage students to, within any creative writing class I teach, to access a digital database of works, and they're contributing to the nightly assignments as well as me contributing to the nightly assignments, and they self-select. And so at every turn, they're working to inquire about their own aesthetic preferences, without having to adhere or please my aesthetic preferences. And in doing so, we really work toward them identifying what they want to express on the page, and who they're excited by and inspired by, and have them communicate that to one another. And so in that way, they're truly owning their work. And when they own it, there's no sense of commodification. It's not a possibility, because it is truly theirs.
Thank you so much. Those are such creative strategies in response to that issue. I wish I could take classes with both of you. Another question from one of our attendees. Violence is a really pertinent topic considering the day's events. Can Felicia and Susan talk about their experiences trying to bear witness to violence done to their students of color. As writers, have you been able to enlist your readers or even the administrations of your schools to step in or contribute in ways they weren't before?
I can start. I think speaking as a white faculty member, I have seen it, and unfortunately, I have not often. I have regrets about times when I haven't stepped in, right? And it's the same kind of conditioning Felicia's talking about, where we're taught to to pacify everything in the classroom, to calm everything down. And I think I say this because I encourage other white instructors out there to step up and to put away your discomfort. A moment of discomfort is not worth the many, many hurts that most of your students of color have faced. To give them space to articulate their discomfort, to respect that space. We have been really, I think, fortunate at the University of Arizona. We have made steps to have a more diverse faculty. It's not as diverse as it should be. We've made steps to have recruit more diverse students, but that means active work in the workshops. We've had frank town hall discussions. We've revamped syllabi. We have a department, a program, and a institutional committee on diversity. But like committees on diversity, I love the expression Felicia used of being gummed up in diversity work, right? Like the committee is one thing and the work is like everyday constant. And in the classroom, I think one of the things that I've learned is that when you have a student who's doing the kind of work that shouldn't need to be done, like a student like Felicia, and we've had students say, hey, look, something's not right in this particular workshop. Can we talk to you about it? That the response is, oh my God, thank you, and let's help, as opposed to what a lot of faculty, white faculty get into, which is this like defensive hiding in the shell. I'm not a racist. So I feel like I'm babbling in saying that I think there are structural things that you can do. You need to be preventative. I feel like I'm talking to white faculty here. Like you need to be preventative. You need to be thoughtful. And if you feel like you're totally lost, you have no excuse, because you can read a book like Felicia Rose Chavez's book and really get a sense of some of the very practical things that you can be doing to help your students and to look out for them. And white students are really, really good about talking about their discomfort, and that's fine. Let them talk about their discomfort, but do not let their discomfort be the standard by which we gauge every interaction in the class, because they're trained to be able to talk about it in ways that your other students may not be.
Yeah, I'll just quickly add that violence is violence is violence. So every day, people of color experience a violence to their emotional and psychological, physical and intellectual health. I mean, it's every single day. So I encourage students to facilitate their own workshops, to own that workshop experience in which they're able to say, you are not allowed to speak to me that way. And they're saying it both to me, they're saying it to their peers, and we're building a community in which we're able to receive those words, that we say them very mindfully, that we're able to, it may not even need to get to escalate to that point, but that sense of violence, it lives with us, it follows us. I think of just the other day, I got a gift card for Christmas, and I had to it was like a big to-do that mama was going to leave the house. Had to make sure everybody was covered and everything, so I got this hour to go out, and I went to this store. Is an Anthropology here in Colorado. And this woman, a white woman, followed me around. It felt like stalking. I mean, she was right behind me. I was touching the jewelry, and she was so close to me that I finally just put the stuff down. And normally I would leave. Normally I would just say, I'm uncomfortable and I want to leave. And this time I turned around and I said, you do not get to do this to me. And I tried to practice, right? That same, it's a lifelong lesson, what we're teaching them in workshop. It's not just an academic exercise. It is an everyday practice to say no. And then on the ride home, you know, I'm crying and I say, she does not get to steal my joy. Like white supremacy does not get to steal my joy today. Because it's every day. And so that's another practice against violence. We don't have to go to an administrator, but we can teach our students, hey, let's preserve our dignity and let's defend it. And let's also celebrate all the beauty that comes along with what we stand for. And so I like to think of violence expansively that way, because it's, you know, there's a bureaucracy, but often I don't necessarily believe in that bureaucracy. We have a lot of work to do within academia to make that something that we can lean on and depend on. So I advocate that students do it themselves.
Thank you so much for both of those answers. I see that we're at time, and I know our panelists have a lot to get back to. So that was incredible. Thank you so much. I thought this was such a productive discussion, and I hope our attendees did as well. We really appreciate your time. Thank you again, and I hope you both have good evenings and stay healthy and safe, and same going for your family and your loved ones. And yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. Wonderful to be here with you. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for this space.
Absolutely. All right. Good night.